In the last video, I showed you how to load data using Ajax from a TXT file. In the course materials for this video, you will find this Ajax JSON. So let's open this into the editor. And JSON is going to be really important since almost all the REST APIs are going to be using JSON. So we're gonna see how you can read the values and print the results from a JSON in JavaScript. Something really simple. Here we have a button for the employee, button 2 for employees, and then we have an ID for employee and another div with ID employees in plural. If you open this employee.json, this file is empty. Here we are going to create the JSON. So if you have no experience working with JSON, you will learn how to create a JSON file. We also have employees.json. This one is also empty. I'm gonna show you how to work with JSON with multiple objects in the next video. First, we're gonna work with this employee. I'm gonna open the app.js, and if you take a look here in the HTML, we're gonna execute employee when the button 1 is submitted or clicked. So we're gonna add the following code: document.getElementById. We're gonna pass button 1. And we're going to add an event listener click. We're going to call this function load employee like this. So we're going to create this function load employee. So this is going to be really similar to the last example, but we're going to open this employee.json. If you haven't used JSON before, .json is going to be the extension when you create a JSON file. But normally JSON is going to be used more in a REST API. In this chapter, we're going to see how you can read the values from a JSON REST API. But first, we're going to start simple. We're going to start working with this employee.json. So this JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. And it's going to be really similar to a JavaScript object. Normally, a JSON will be created using the curly braces. Then you're going to use a key and a value. So for example, let's say that we are working in an employee. We're going to add something like an ID. And you can see that this ID is grabbed inside double quotes. It has to be inside double quotes. If you use single quotes or the backtick, it's going to cause you an error. Then you're going to pass the value. So we're going to add one right here. Normally, you can add strings or numbers into your JSON. Then we're going to create another one. We're going to call this name. I'm going to add my name. Then we're going to add company. So we're going to add, it's going to be double quotes, my company. And you can see that between each one of these, we have a comma here, comma here. And the only that doesn't need a comma is going to be the last one. In this case, I'm going to add another one. So we're going to add another comma. And we're going to call this job, and we're going to call web developer like this. So this is going to be our first JSON. You can see this last one doesn't have this comma. Also, you can see that we're using double quotes in all of these keys, but this one, which is a number. So this is going to be a really basic JSON. We're going to close this, and from here we're going to write this function. Remember, we need to perform 4 different steps. So first we create the object. It's going to be const xhr equals to new XML HTTP request. Then you open the connection. So it's going to be xhr connection dot open. In this case is going to be also get. We're gonna open the employee.json file, and this is going to be asynchronous. Then you execute the function. So we're going to use xhr onload equals to a function, and we're going to add if this dot status equals 200. We're going to execute the code. If you remember, this is going to return a response text, so we can add something like a document and a dot get element by ID, and we need to open this employee ID. So we're gonna select this and pass this employee. We're gonna add inner HTML. It's going to be equals to this that response text. This is going to be the response that we're getting when you are trying to open this employee.json. Finally, the last step is going to be send a request. And it's going to be HR send like this. So this is going to work. Let's open the project. You can see we have employee. Click here, and you can see that we have something like this. It's printing the JSON, but it's printing this as a normal string. If you open the console here, try to open the console. Click here on console and try to send this response text into the console. Console.log. That response text. So save this and open again the project. Click here and you can see that this is printing a string. So we can use the function that we saw earlier, JSON.parse. JSON.parse is going to convert this string into a JSON, and it's going to print also actually it's going to print this as an object. So click here and you can see we have an object. This JSON.parse function is going to check for this syntax, and then it will find that once converted is going to be an object. So we can do something like that here. I'm gonna remove this and I'm gonna use JSON.parse like this. Save this and click here on employee. You can see we have object, and this is because now this is an object and we need to access each of the properties using a dot. So we're gonna cut this and we're gonna create a variable called employee, and then we're gonna create another one. Here we're going to add build the template, and this one right here get the response as an object. That's why we're using JSON.parse. So we're going to have const output is going to be equals to the backtip template literals, and we're gonna use UL. Close the UL, the unordered list. Then we're gonna create an li, close the li, and we're going to add ID right here. Then we open the $, curly braces, and the name of the object is employee. And if you open this employee, you can see that the key is called index ID. So we're gonna add employee.id so we can access that property. We need to access the rest of the properties. So the next one is going to be the name of the employee, name, employee, that name, and close the li. The other one, or the third one, is going to be company. So we're going to add company, employee, that company, close the li. Finally, it's going to be the job that this person is doing in this company. So it's going to be employee, that job, close the li. So this is going to build the template. So right here, I'm going to add print the HTML, and it's going to be equals to this output variable. So something like this is going to print a formatted data right here into this page. So let's click on employee, and now you can see we have ID, the number one, we have name, we have the company, and we have a job. So now you can see that this looks more formatted, and this is how you read JSON data with JavaScript. You have to access each of the properties, or at least the properties that you want to print. So in the next video, we're gonna see how you can print multiple records, multiple objects in a JSON file. In this video, I'm gonna show you how to read a JSON with multiple records. So basically, it's going to be an array. So we're gonna copy this and we're gonna use this as the base. So when you have a JSON and you have multiple records, you're gonna use the square brackets. That means this is going to be an array of JSON objects. Then we're gonna paste the data. You can see we have one and we have the information, Right here, I'm gonna add a comma. So we're gonna create another one. So let's add this, an ID is going to be 2. I'm gonna change the name. Right here, I'm gonna use Mary, and it's going to be the same company. And the job is going to be designer, something like this. Then we're gonna add another one, comma right here, paste, and this ID is going to be number 3. The name is going to be Alexa, and finally the job is going to be app developer. So notice that we have these commas in each property. Only the last one doesn't have a comma. This is really similar when you have an array of JSON objects. You have a comma here, but this one, the last one, doesn't require the comma. And actually, if you add a comma right here, this is going to print an error. You can see that we have this error right here, trailing comma. So we can save this, close this, and now you can see in the index.html, we have this button too, to fire the employees. And then we have this ID called employees. So we're gonna open this file, copy this and paste. In this case, we're gonna change this to button 2. And we're gonna call this function load employees in plural. So this is going to be really similar. So we're gonna copy this function. And right here, I'm going to add displays single employee. And this one is going to display all the employees. So paste this, and we're gonna change the name of the function, copy this name, and change right here. So here on the top, we have a function that is going to print a single employee. This one is going to print multiple employees. The steps are going to be the same. We need to create the object. We need to open the connection. We need to execute the function. And we need to send a request. Basically, this is the same. Here we're gonna change the name of the file. It's going to be employees in plural. Then I'm gonna cut this template and remove everything from here. You can see that we have this employees, so we're gonna change this to employees, and I'm gonna console.log this result, console log employees in plural. So save this and click on the second button. You can see that this is returning an array with 3 different objects. So if you want to print this similar to this, we need to write a for each statement. So we're going to remove this. And this is what we are going to do. We're going to add a new variable called output. And this is going to be a single string. Then we're going to add employees dot for each like this, and then we're gonna execute a function. In this case, employees is plural. Here we're gonna pass this as singular, like this. Then we're gonna grab this output, and we're gonna add output, and we're gonna concatenate. So it's going to be output plus equals and template or string literals, and we're gonna paste this code from the previous example. Semicolon right here. And this is going to create 3 different unordered lists with the information for each employee. And finally, if you open the project, we have this div with the ID employees. So right here, after everything is done, we're gonna add document dot get element by ID. We're gonna pass employees inner HTML, and it's going to be equals to the output. So save this, click on the second button, and now you can see we had 3 different records. If you click on employee, now you can see we have 1 record. So the most important thing here is to remember how you can create a JSON. You have to use the curly braces and a key and a value grab with double quotes. This is going to be important. If you have multiple records, you have to add the square bracket, so this is going to be an array. And if you try to iterate between a single object, it's going to be like this. If you try to iterate in an array of JSON objects, you have to use while, do while for each or any of these functions, and you have to access each of the properties that you want to print individually, and you are going to be fine. So in the next video, we're going to see how you can use Ajax and display and REST API. So before we start working with the next projects, we're going to see what is an API, a REST API, and what is a request. So let's start learning about APIs first. API stands for Application Programming Interface. It's a set of functions, methods, and tools available in a library. An API must be used by other software as an abstraction layer, and in order to access and use the service, you have to send a structure request, which is defined by the API. A nice example of an API is Google Maps API. When you add Google Maps into a website, you are using this API in another piece of software. This is an abstraction layer because you are not programming directly into the Google Maps API, but you send a structure request, for example, to tell the Google Maps API the zoom level, the latitude and longitude, where the pin is going to be displayed, the type of map that you want to display. Everything is going to be part of an structure request. You have to use the functions that the Google Maps API has defined. So then, in the other hand, we have REST APIs. So REST is representational state transfer. A REST API can be developed in any language. Even JavaScript, you can develop a REST API. It will describe how the resources are going to be available and how you are going to access them. A REST API must respond to the following requests: get, post, put, patch, and delete. Each API have its own set of rules, method, and structure. We're gonna work with some different REST APIs, and you are going to see that in order to use this, we are going to use different techniques to access the data. So let's review some examples of this request and something called the endpoints. REST API endpoints and request. A REST API must use endpoints, which at the end are URLs, to perform CRUD operations. So for example, if you want to retrieve all the clients in REST, you have to use a GET request, and normally it's going to be /clients, the endpoint. If you want to get a specific client, again, the request is going to be GET, and normally the URL is going to be /clients /the ID. In this case, for example, we are returning the ID 10. If you want to add a new client, it's going to be post. Post is going to add a new client, and the URL is going to be the /clients. If you want to update the client info, the request is going to be put. Then you're going to use the endpoint /clients and the ID, which in this case, for example, is going to be 3. Of course, this ID is going to be different based on the client that you want to update. Finally, if you want to remove a client, you are going to send a delete request to the URL /clients and then the ID of this client. So basically, this is REST APIs and endpoints with requests. We're going to start working with this in the next chapters. We're going to develop some examples using REST APIs, and you're going to see how easy it is to consume REST APIs in JavaScript. In this video, we're going to see how you can consume a REST API with Ajax and JavaScript. If you scroll to the bottom in this page, JSON placeholder, you will find that this is a free service to test and learn about REST APIs. So if you scroll a little, you can see that we have these resources at the bottom. So for example, you can open these albums, and it's going to print some albums right here. Some photos. It's going to be a response. It's going to be a JSON response. But you can access the values, title, URL, and the thumbnail URL, something like that. We're going to close this. And this is going to return 5,000 items, so it's going to be really big response. We have also some to-dos. You can see that we have something different. And by the way, this is looking like this. Maybe you have a different view, because here I added this extension called JSON view. I really recommend that you install this. It's going to format the JSON responses a lot better instead of the basic view that you will find in any browser. So we're gonna close this, and finally you have also users. So this is going to print some users. So let's create an example using this. I'm gonna open this JSON API. So we're gonna open this into the editor. You will find this folder in your course materials. It's called JSON API, and it's going to be the project that we're going to use. It's going to be something really simple. Again, it's gonna be using a framework called Skeleton, and you can see that here only have this button that says load post, and this is an href. It contains this ID called load, and we also have this div with ID result. If you open the app.js, this is going to be empty. Here is where we are going to work in this video. And finally, one thing to notice here is, for example, if you open this post, this is going to be a JSON response. Doing this kind of stuff, consuming REST APIs, is going to be really common when developing with JavaScript. So this is something that any JavaScript developer should know. That's why we have this into this course. And by the way, also the projects from the rest of the course are gonna be using REST APIs. So we're gonna write a selector. We have document dot query selector, and we're gonna select the button with ID load. Then we're gonna attach an event listener. It's going to be click, and we're gonna call this function load post. Then we're going to add this function load post, and this is going to be using Ajax, and we need to perform the 4 different steps. So first we're gonna create the object, and it's going to be a variable const hr equals to new XML HTTP request. Then we're gonna open the connection. Open the connection is going to use this variable and the method called open. First parameter is going to be get. It's going to be a get request. Second parameter is going to be the URL that we have here. So you can, for example, once we finish this example, you can test the other resources that you will find in JSON placeholder. We're gonna use post for this example, and we're gonna make this asynchronous. And then we're gonna execute the function, and we're gonna use hr load is going to be equals to a function. Then we're gonna check for the status. If this status is equals to 200, we're going to execute the code. You can see that this is an JSON response. So this is going to come as a string, and we need to convert this into a JavaScript object. So we're gonna create a variable response, and it's going to be equals to json.parse, and we're gonna pass this dot, and the response is going to come as response text. Then we can console log the response just to test that everything is working. And finally, you need to send the request, and add hr send, and save this. Open the project and open also the console, and we're gonna open console, click here, and you can see we have an array with 100 objects. You can see we have at the bottom length 100. You can see here in the response JSON placeholder, it says it will return 100 items. So we have something like this. So in order to work with this, we're gonna, for example, I'm gonna expand this. I want to print the body and also the title. So you can see this is an array, so we're gonna use for each. So we're gonna remove this, print the contents, and it's going to be let output equals to nothing. And then we're gonna start looping through this array. Response dot for each. This is going to execute a function, and it's going to be a post. So from here we're gonna concatenate this. So we're gonna concatenate this output plus equals template or string literals, and we're gonna add an h3, close the h3, and right here I'm going to create the $sign, curly braces, post, and we want to print the title and the body. So it's going to be dot title, and let's add a paragraph. Second one is going to be post that body. Finally, we need to insert this into the HTML, so we're gonna use document dot query selector, and we're gonna use result inner HTML equals to the output. So this is going to print all the posts. 100 posts is going to print the body and the content. So click here, and now you can see we have 100 posts from this REST API. So consuming REST APIs is going to be really common when you are a JavaScript developer. And this is a really simple REST APIs. There are some others that are more advanced where you can send some arguments into the URL. We're gonna see an example of one of these REST APIs in the next video, where we are going to develop a complete project using a REST API. So in your course materials for this course, you will find this Ajax folder. I'm gonna open this in Visual Studio Code, and then I'm gonna open this index.html, and I'm gonna open this with live server. So this is really simple. It only has this load Ajax button. You can see we have the button right here, and also we have this with the ID output. And you will find that we have this data.txt file. We're gonna see how you can load the contents from a text file into your website using Ajax. Then we're gonna open this app.js, and right here I'm gonna create an event listener for this button. You can see it has this ID, so we're gonna add document get element by ID. Then we're gonna pass this button, and we're going to attach an event listener. It's going to be click, and we're gonna call this function load data. Then we're going to write the function load data, and we're gonna open a function. I'm gonna show you how to create an Ajax code with this code when we click in this button. So always when you are working with Ajax, you have to perform 4 different steps. The first one is create the new XML HTTP request object, and it's going to be something like this. You can name this wherever you want. In this case, I'm gonna use a const, and normally you will find all the examples on the internet using this XHR. Then I'm gonna add equals to new XML HTTP request. So this is going to create the object for the XML HTTP request. So that will create the object. Then you open the connection, and you are gonna use this same variable, and then you are gonna use a function called open. From here you can specify the request. In this case we're gonna use get. Then it's going to be the URL. In this case I want to open this file data.txt, and then if you want to make this call asynchronous, you pass the last parameter as true. Then it's going to be the execution of the Ajax call, and here we're going to use XHR again on load, and this is going to be a function. From here we're going to check if this status is equals to 200. That means that this call was successful. So you can add something like this. We're gonna select this output, and I'm going to add document that get element by ID. We're gonna add output, and we're gonna insert the text, the response that we're receiving from this Ajax call. Let me add the rest of the code. This response text, and we're gonna close the H1. So this response text is going to be the response that we get from the server when we execute the URL using the connection. Finally, you need to send a request. Send a request, and it's going to be xhr send. So save this and open your project, and we need to click here, and you can see we have some info from a txt file, and this is going to be the contents from this data.txt file. So if I open this again, you can see that we have this status equals 200. There are several status. For example, and right here, if I console log this status like this, and open the project again, and open inspect, open the console, click here, and you can see we have the status is 200. If we change this file name to something else, save this and click here, and you can see we have 404. Really similar as the code that you will receive. For example, if you open a website and try to navigate into a page that doesn't exist, it will return 404 error. This is something really similar. So for example, there are 3 different codes, and the more commons, 200 is correct. Also 403 is forbidden, and 404 is not found. So right here we are checking that we are in the code 200, which is correct. Then we're gonna return, or we're gonna print the values from the file that we have here. Now this is a method that you can use to make Ajax call. Maybe you found on the internet an example using this code, something similar to this. I'm gonna comment this code that we have here, like this. There is another way of doing Ajax call. Is using the same, but using xhr on ready state change. Maybe you find an example on the internet, but you are not really sure what this means. So this was the older way of doing Ajax calls. So normally you will add something like this: if that this status equals to 200 and this dot ready state equals to 4, then normally you will execute the code like this. So copy this and paste and save this. Click here on load Ajax call, and you can see that we have the same result as we did in the last example. In this case, this is using on ready state change. So for example, if I add something like console.log ready state, we add a comma, then we add xhr ready state like this, save this, open the project, click here. You can see we have different ready states, 2, 3, and 4. Let me cut this, and maybe we can add the ready state from here. Well, I think it's going to be like this. But for example, you can see we have 2, 3, and 4. There are also meanings for this code. Ready states, I'm going to add the code right here. 0 is going to be equals to unsent, and 1 is going to be opened, and these are the codes that are running. 2 is going to be receive, 3 is going to be equals to loading, and 4 is going to be equals to done. So you can see that we are checking the status 200, and you can see 200 is correct, and also we're checking the ready state, which is going to be 4, and 4 is when this call is done. So in the next video, and then in the next videos, we're gonna continue learning about Ajax. In the newest versions of JavaScript, we have something called the fetch API, but I think it's important as a JavaScript developer that you know at least the basics of Ajax. So let's continue working in the next video.